don't have a problem with Karima Brown. We engage her robustly, without fear, without favor. And any fool that threatened Karima Brown with rape, with violence, that person is not EFF. It's a thug that must be isolated from EFF people. Having said that, it doesn't mean Karima Brown is not an ANC mole, an ANC agent. She remains exactly that. But she doesn't deserve to be threatened with violence.
A non-apology from Julius Malema on the eve of the Gauteng High Court hearing against journalist Karima Brown's intimidation case. She's suing the EFF leader for intimidation, violence and enabling her abuse. His tweet about Karima Brown led to calls for her rape and death by alleged EFF trolls. Now, joining me to discuss the case is political analyst Lukhona Mnguni. Welcome. What are your thoughts on his comments there at the political rally over the weekend, the sort of non-apology?
Well, I suppose it was a non-apology in the sense that it was not an apology without some political speech around it. But I think what he is communicating is that the EFF is not going to sort of do away about having a perception about politics and the political nature or affiliation that they perceive out of Karima Brown. I thought,
does that justify that sort of language?
I thought, well, of course, if we were to talk about the actions and whether people should have political disagreements with journalists or even ourselves as analysts, I think that's a different question altogether, as opposed to the part where he talks about her not needing to be subjected to abuse, to the intimidation and the threats that she had received as a result of his actions. I think what is more important are his actions rather than whether or not he is allowed to have political views on the work of any journalist or on the work of any analyst. I think everybody can formulate those political views. I think
but it's the sort of information that you hand out, and it's how quickly you jump in and say, hang on a minute, this is not acceptable.
So definitely, so that is what is at the heart of this case, which was being discussed today before a judge in the South Gauteng High Court. Does Mr. Malema understand the nature and the extent to which the nature of his act violates Karima Brown? And of course, we've seen...
And breaching the electoral code when he tweeted
and breaching the electoral code. But I don't... that is very important, the electoral code. But I think, for me, it surpasses the mood of elections and the timing of elections. It goes beyond. What is the expected conduct of political leaders, and particularly those who command high followings on Twitter, like Julius Malema, for example? Could he have foreseen that his acts, particularly of carrying Karima Brown's number in a posting that he was putting across on Twitter, that it would generate some traffic to her and it would attract certain elements of intimidation and harassment? And we've seen this before. For example, when Penny Sparrow and the whole racist comment she had made on social media, people quickly made available her number because she was an estate agent, so it was quite easy to get a cell phone number. And they knew that it was going to lead to her targeting and having traffic and volume of traffic. And could Malema have foreseen the threats of violence, the threats of rape and killing? I think that is what's going to be part of the court. He might not have foreseen that, but he definitely must have foreseen some level of harassment.
I mean, we've had those threats against journalists before, and your followers will just pick it up and run with it. Let's just go to the judgment now, which has been reserved in Karima Brown's case against the EFF. The EFF says it's pure speculation that there's a link between leader Julius Malema posting a number and the harassment that followed. Govan Whittles has the details.
It's pure conjecture that there's a link between Karima Brown being harassed and verbally abused through messages and the tweet that was posted by Julius Malema exposing her cell phone number to his 2.3 million followers. But he went a little bit further than that. Let's have a look at what he said.
In order for a link to be established between the publication of the message by Mr. Malema at KB3 showing Ms. Brown's cell phone number inadvertently and showing what it is that she said to the WhatsApp group, in order to establish a link between that conduct of Mr. Malema posting this message on the one hand and the abusive messages and harassing messages that she received from people who call themselves supporters of EFF, there has to be a comparison with what kind of vitriol did Ms. Brown meet before that tweet. So one can't jump to the conclusion and say, well, because you tweeted this and thereafter there was a lot of messages that are abusive coming to your phone, therefore those people did it because of your message, if you haven't done a comparison with what went on before that.
Now, that's obviously going to rumble in the courts a little longer. It's not just the EFF. I mean, we saw Jessie Duarte and her response to one of our ENCA reporters. I mean, there seems to be a feeling amongst many politicians that it's okay to thump the media. What do you see as the role now between politicians and the media, and what impact it has on media freedom?
There's always going to be a strain between politicians and the media, and it comes from what are the stories that the media pursues and whether some politicians feel that they are being targeted, and unfortunately the media will report what is there. I often say that the politicians wouldn't attract negative commentary and reporting if they were actually doing the right things and leading in a proper and correct way. So they necessarily attract some of these stories. But there is also, of course, a conversation among media personnel that people have been saying, as the media personnel who have been saying, let's introspect as well. Have we gotten certain things wrong? So when you hear of publications being berated for having wrongly gotten huge stories with massive ramifications for people that were involved in those stories, it sort of does discredit the media. And so
it plays into the hands of those politicians, those critics saying, look, you know.
It definitely does, and that's why there has to be often a renewed and consistent introspection from the media itself. And I often say, at times, it's also this idea that is sold to the public of a neutral media, and whether or not we shouldn't have a media that actually positions itself much more, agenda sets, and is actually quite transparent about what is it that it is positioned towards doing.
Well, I think most journalists would think that they sit in that neutral position.
That would be the change, you know, in the culture of how the media functions. You would know that across the world, various media publications are actually quite known, even in the political landscape, where they are playing, who they're betting for, and there's no confusion. And so the public goes to consume news from that particular media house, knowing very much where they are slanting towards or inclined in terms of their political views. And I think
but you see many of our politicians, or you know, not only politicians, but they'll attack the media just because they don't like something that they've been asked. And you get the sense that they feel they can attack it because they're in a position and basically they can do what they want. I mean, that sort of message to their followers, to their supporters, to those sort of Twitter trolls, it's not a good one.
No, certainly. I mean, cyberbullying is something that happens, and I think every leader, political, in the media, should know what triggers this cyberbullying. And definitely the words of politicians have a triggering effect on those that follow them, particularly if you have boxed a number of individuals or particular media houses as behaving in this particular way because they've got an agenda between person 1 and 2, or they've got an agenda against certain political party or parties. So there are always going to be those comments. And of course, there's the other side of it where some of the smaller political players don't complain about being targeted. They complain about being left out by the media, and that there's no focus that is placed on them. The focus is on the bigger parties, and I think that's
and also, sorry, that's sort of, so going back to the abuse, I mean, that certainly censors a lot of people, don't they? I mean, the woman who experiences kind of abuse. But tell me what sort of political impact this kind of behavior, this sort of attitude towards journalists, towards media, and towards women will have, and how it'll play out at the polls, if at all.
I think it plays a role in the voters' mind in so far as seeing some of the hostility that some political parties have against the media, against some female journalists, and against some people that, you know, get fingered out as part of a plot. So some voters care about those things, because when they count about what does it mean to be democratic, they count media freedom as one of the key fundamental pillars of building a free free and open society. Hence, we talk about the media as the fourth estate when we talk about the setup of governance. So it's very important to secure the media freedom. So those voters who care about media freedoms will be very skeptical of political parties that have shown some level of hostility against media houses and personnel. So definitely that will play a role. Will it play a role on everybody? The reality is that when those political parties attack some people in the media, there are members in the electorate who actually support that because they too start to align particular media houses and journalists with certain agendas because they may not be feeling that their parties are being reported on fairly and reported on with facts, as it were.
And again,
as we say, the strenuous relationship between the media and politicians will never go away. But I think at some point or the other, there has to be commitment from politicians that if they say they are safeguarding media freedoms, there are certain behaviors that they are willing not to partake in as a way that would fuel the general public to also adopt a posture. But as I'm saying, media transparency is also important insofar as what I call the positional media, because I do think, even if not pronounced, media houses do have some way or the other where they position themselves in the entire landscape.
Thank you very much for coming in. That's our show for tonight. News is next.